Hi there, and welcome to day 10 of the Festive Tech Calendar. My name is Garry Trinder, and I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft focused on Microsoft 365 development. Today, we're going to build an advent calendar bot for Microsoft Teams using Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. Now I say we, as I really like you to follow along. You don't need any prior experience of building bots, but a basic understanding of JavaScript will be helpful. Okay, with that in mind, let's take a look at the bot that we're going to build. Okay, so we're in Microsoft Teams. We have a chat window open. Now this is the chat window for our bot. So this is our interface of how to interact with our bot. So our bot has two features. It has a notification and it also has a command. So let's take a look at the first feature, the notification. As you can see, we've received a message into the bot's chat with a message of it's time to open today's door and an action button to open that door. This is great for a reminder. You could send a message every single day just as a prompt that, oh, the door is open, so you can quickly and easily open that door. So let's open the door and let's see what's behind it. So when I click open, this opens up a task module or a dialog window. And inside this dialog window, we have some content. In this case, we have a nice Christmas advert to see. Okay, so that's the notification. Next, let's take a look at the command. Now, we have a command called calendar. So if we send a message to the bot with the word calendar in there, what that does is this returns us an advent calendar. So each number represents the day, and we can open the content for that day by just clicking on it. So let's have a look at day 2. It opens the dialog and we have our content for that day. Now, let's say people try and get ahead of themselves and try and open a day that's they're not quite at. Let's see how that's handled as well. So I've tried to open the 24th of December. It's actually closed, so therefore I get a message. And that is it. This is the bot that we're going to build, and I'll step you through step by step of how to build each component, and at the end we'll have exactly the same functionality. Okay, let's get started. So before we start jumping into writing code, there's a few prerequisites that I need to call out at this stage. So one of the things that we're going to need is we're going to need a Microsoft 365 tenant in which that we can install our bot application against use Microsoft Teams. Now, if you don't have your own, then good news is you can request a free instant developer sandbox. And you can do that by joining the Microsoft 365 developer program. Now, using a sandbox, this is your own environment. You get your own users, you get your own sample data packs as well, your own licenses, specifically to be used for development purposes. So if you're wanting to try out development on Microsoft 365, this is a great place to start than trying to start on production environments where things are a lot more locked down. In here, you can have a play around, turn on some of the configurations, turn them off. But generally, this is a great place to start your development journey. The next prerequisite is you're going to need to have Node.js installed. So if you don't have this installed, you can click the download here for the LTS version, which is currently 18. If you already have Node installed on your machine, say you have an earlier version like version 16, that is also fine. If you have version 16, then you can skip this part. So we're going to be using Visual Studio Code as our editor in this session. This is due to Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code is a Visual Studio Code extension. So therefore, that's why we need it. And our final prerequisite is a service called ngrok. This is used to translate your local host domain to a publicly accessible URL, which we're going to need for interacting with Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Bot framework service as well, and serving the content from our local machine during development. Now, there's going to be a bit here where we're going to need to supply an authorization token midway through this session. So at this point here, just go and sign up for a free account, and we'll come back to this later when we need to add our authorization token. So the first thing we need to do is open Visual Studio Code and install Teams Toolkit. So you can install Teams Toolkit by going to the extensions marketplace and type in Teams Toolkit. And this will return Teams Toolkit as the very first option. Just click the little green install button, and that installs the toolkit for you. You know it's installed because there's a little Teams icon in the side panel. So let's open that up. It just gives us some options for viewing some samples or creating a new Teams app. Well, we want to create our new project, so let's create a new Teams app, and let's select that option again. So we're going to start with building our notification. So we want to choose the post messages to Teams capability. And we'll choose the HTTP trigger, which will use a RESTify server in its implementation. We'll choose JavaScript. And for this, I'm just going to choose the default folder because that's fine for me. But if you want to put this project anywhere on your machine, then just use the browse option on there and place that where you want to. But for now, I'm just going to use the default location. Okay, let's enter an application name. So let's just try FTC, Festive Tech Calendar, Advent Bot, and hit enter. And that starts the scaffolding process. So Teams Toolkit is creating our new project, and it opens up the new project in a new instance of Visual Studio Code. And here we can see it. So you can see that it's created a project with various folders that contains the configuration that Teams Toolkit is going to hold on to whilst it's setting everything up for us, some debug profiles, our bot, our actual source code, and also some templates as well, like the app manifest and some templates to eventually deploy this to Azure. Don't worry if this is a bit confusing at the moment, but I'll go through this as we go along. I'll explain where relevant these different folders and what they do. Okay, so we've created the project. The first thing that we want to do is to actually run this. So out of the box, we can run this and just make sure that we're able to send notifications to Teams using this template. So the easiest way to do that is to start a debug session. Now, you can do that by just hitting F5 on your keyboard, which starts the process, or you can come across to this Run and Debug panel on the left-hand side. Now, there's two different options here for different browsers. So defaults is Chrome, but there's also an option for Edge. Now, I don't have Chrome installed on my machine. I have Edge installed on my machine. So if I just use the default, I'd get an error. So I'm going to come into here and I'm just going to change this to Edge, because that's the browser I'm going to use. And I'm going to start the debug session by clicking the little green icon here. Okay, so the process has started. So Teams Toolkit has started its process of launching our app against our Microsoft 365 tenant. Now, one of the things that it needs us to authenticate with our tenant so that Teams Toolkit can perform operations on our behalf. So let's follow the sign in button, and this is going to launch a browser window and ask us to authenticate with our Microsoft 365 tenant. So I've already done this before, so my account is already mentioned in there. But just follow the steps. You'll probably get a username and password prompt. Follow the steps until you get to this screen. Once you're signed in, you can just close the browser and you can go back to Visual Studio Code. So as this is running, I just want to bring your attention to a few checks that Toolkit has done in the background. So you can see here that there's some checks that are happening just to make sure that we've got Node.js installed, checking to make sure that we have authenticated with Microsoft 365, which it did, and it provided the prompt for us to sign in. It's also checking to see whether ngrok is installed, so the service that's going to make our local host domain publicly accessible. It's checking to see if we've got that, and if not, it's actually installing that for us as well. And also it's checking to make sure that the ports that are needed to be open for our bot to work on our local machine are open as well. And we've got a summary there just to show that yes, I've got these different versions installed and everything's good, so it's moved on to the next stage. Now, the next stage, and the first time you launch your app through Teams Toolkit, is it needs to install all of the npm packages, so it does an npm install. So at this point, it might take a while for you to install those. But once it's done that, it'll then start some of the tunneling services, so we can see that ngrok has been started, and we've got a publicly accessible URL here that's pointing to our local host URL. There's also some activity going on here as well. Azure Active Directory app has been registered. Bot Framework app has been registered. I'll just quickly go back to the output and show you that again. Our messaging endpoint on our bot has been updated to point to our publicly accessible address, so that when we send messages to the bot framework, it knows where to send messages back to us. And also saving different IDs of the different bots and app registrations locally in our project. And all this happens the very first time that you run it. Second time we run it, it'll skip over these and it'll be much quicker. Finally, it's actually running our app. If I go to the terminal window now, we can see that we've got a bot that's started and a debugger that has been attached. And also we can see that our local tunnel service is running as well. Now what this has also done is, in the background, it's opened up a web browser. So I'm going to go to this web browser here, which is now asking for us to sign into our Microsoft 365 tenant. So just go through the sign-in steps here. And if you've got MFA turned on like I do, just make sure that you go through the MFA steps. So I've approved that, and I want to reduce the sign-ins, which is great. So this is now launching Microsoft Teams. It's going to go through the process of us installing our app into our Microsoft Teams tenant. Okay, so we've got a dialog window here. So this is the app install dialog, and we've got different options of where we can install this app. So by default, we can install it in all the different locations in Teams. So we can have an actual team, a group chat, or a meeting. But if we click the add button, this is going to add the app in the personal context. So it's going to be a personal app that I can pin to the left-hand rail. So let's click add. And just close that second window down. So when we add the app, it's automatically loading up the chat window in which we can receive our messages into. So this is our bot's interface. So let's do that now. Let's push a message into Teams. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and let's open up a new terminal window. So the way that we send messages into Teams is we can send a HTTP request to our bot, and that's going to invoke a message. So we can do that by sending a HTTP post to this location here. So this localhost address and the notification endpoint. I'm just going to send an empty body here. Now I'm using curl. You can use anything for this. So if you're happy using Postman or you want to use PowerShell, choose whichever capability you want, as long as you're sending a HTTP post, that will be enough. So let's send that request, and we get an empty response. So if we go back to Teams, so now we can see, okay, great, we've had our message received. And in this case, we've got an action button on there. If I click the action button, it just opens up a URL. So it's a different type of action button than what we actually need, but the functionality is there for us to get a message proactively into our chat. So I mentioned in the prerequisites that at some point we would need to get an authorization token from the ngrok service and apply that. So after we've run the bot for the first time and Toolkit's done all the installation and configuration that it needs to do, it also installed ngrok. And what we need to do is we just need to update that installation with our auth token. So if you go to the start local tunnel, you can see that it provides us the location of where the ngrok executable is stored on your machine. So let's go to the terminal window and let's just change to that directory. So let's change to that. And then what we can do is we can provide the auth token by using this auth token command and then providing the actual token at the end. So to get the token, if you go to your ngrok dashboard, sign into the service, go to your auth token on the left hand side, you get your auth token in the middle, which you can just copy and you can paste at the end of this command. So now that we have our message being sent into Teams, we want to update that message so it's more appropriate for our needs. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to update the adaptive card template, which is used to deliver that card. So here is the card that was shown in the chat. So we can see that it's a JSON template, but you should be able to work out, even if you're not familiar with adaptive cards, that we have a series of objects which represent the different sections of the template. So we have a text block for the title, a text block for the application name, for the description, and then for the button we have an array of actions. So in this case, it was just an action to open the URL. You've probably noticed that there's these little tokens in here, the dollar parentheses and then the variable name. So this is where you're able to inject data into the template. So you're separating your presentation and your data there. You can simply present the data to your template, render them together and get an output. So let's update this so that we have a card that is more to our needs. So I'm just going to replace this with the card that I've got. So a single text block with some emojis, another text block with some text, and then a new set of actions. In here we've got a different type of action that uses action.submit, and the title is open, which is going to be shown on the actual button. So I'm going to save this. So that's updated the card, the presentation of what we're going to send. Now let's take a look at the actual code that runs to actually send this card. So if we go to index.js, so this file this really represents the web server that is running. This is where the code runs, or the code is triggered by our HTTP request. So if you look at this line here, line 13, we have a server post and we have this endpoint, this API notification endpoint. When a message is received in here, it runs this block of code. So this block of code actually first, it gathers all the installation targets of where our bot may be installed. So obviously, this bot could be installed by many people in our tenant. So it returns us an array of installations, and then for each installation or each target, we use this send adaptive card function to send an adaptive card back to our bot. We have here an adaptive cards declare and render methods. So what this is doing is this is taking our notification template. If we look at the import, we can see that it's coming from the adaptive cards notification default file, the one that we just updated. So that takes in the template, and then it renders by passing in data into the into the function, and the output is the template with the new data. Now we're not actually using any placeholders in this template that we've just updated, so we can actually just remove all of this, and we can save this file. And because we're using Teams Toolkit, we've got hot reload in there, so when I hit save, it restarted all of the processes and it recompiled our code, and then we can see that we got the message that the bot has started, and now our new code is ready to run. So let's do that. Let's send in a new notification. So again, we're going to send a HTTP post request to this endpoint, and we'll get an empty response. And now when we look, we've got our new card and we have our open button. However, when I click the open button this time, okay, nothing happens because we've not implemented anything behind it. We just get that a response was sent to our app. Okay, so now let's implement the dialog behind the open button. So the dialog is a task module, and a task module is essentially an iframe. And so what we need to do is we need to provide the task module with a URL to a page that we can use to render in that task module. So that's what we're going to do now. So let's create a folder called public, and in that folder we're going to create a file called opendoor.html, and in this file I'm just going to add in some basic HTML, which basically just renders a message in the page, and this is what we're going to use for the contents of our dialog at the moment. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we need to tell our web server, which currently is accepting kind of HTTP post requests. We need to tell it how to serve static files, so that when it gets a request for a HTML file, it knows which directory to look in to serve that file up. And this is what this bit of code here is actually doing. We also need to import the path module in here as well, because that's used in its implementation, and that just comes from Node. The next step is we need to update our adaptive card. So our adaptive card at the moment just has the action submit, but it doesn't really send anything. It doesn't tell bot framework of which it's going to send a message to what to actually do. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in this data block here, which sends a Microsoft Teams activity with activity of type task fetch to the bot framework. Now what the bot framework is going to do at that point is it's going to send back a message to our bot with this task fetch activity, and it's going to need a handler to basically respond to this activity. So what we need to do now is we need to create an activity handler. So if we expand the internal folder and create a new file called activity handler. In here, I'm just going to create the shell for our activity handler. So we use an existing class, Teams activity handler, and we create our new handler from that, and we override a method in this handler called handle Teams task module fetch. So this is the bit of code that's going to run when our bot receives a message that has that task fetch activity. Now what this code does is it creates a task info object, so it contains the URL for the content that we want to display. So this is our local file, our HTML file that we just created, and some of the things like height and width, and also what title is going to be shown at the top of that dialog. And then we return an activity, a message back to bot framework with the type of continue that gives the bot framework the information that it then passes on to Teams, and Teams will translate that into expanding a dialog box for us. Now currently we've got this handler, but actually we've not hooked our handler up to the messages that we receive from bot framework. So if we go to index.js, we can see here we have a bot framework message handler. So the code that was already put in place to send a notification into Teams was already handling messages sent backwards and forwards by bot framework, which sits in the middle between our bot and Microsoft Teams. So what we need to do here is we just need to update this handler so that our handler is actually included in this processing. So first I'm going to include our handler in here. So I'm going to import that into this file, and I'm going to create a new instance of it, and then we're going to update this message handler so that the bot that we have already, our existing bot, still processes notifications, the messages for our notifications, but also our activity handler runs as well with the messages that are received. Okay, so I'm going to save that. If we just look at the watcher, so the watcher has just saved all of those updates, and now we're ready to test. So let's Again, send our notification. So because we've updated our adaptive card, we need to send a new instance to our message, to our chat, which has come through. So now if I click open, we get a dialog window, but actually we don't get any content. So there's a couple of things here that we need to keep in mind. In that, what we've just tried to do is we've just tried to serve some content over HTTP, which we can't do with Teams. Teams is going to block anything that is not HTTPS. So if we go back to our activity handler, so we can see here this is HTTP. If we update this to actually use our public address, so if I look at this start local tunnel here, we have our public address, and that is actually being served over HTTPS. So let's use that instead. Okay, so this time let's send another message. And that's been received in. So let's try opening this time. And there we have it. So we have our dialog window, which is showing. So in the previous step, we implemented our dialog. And one of the things that we did was we reused the publicly accessible ngrok URL, but we hard coded this. Now, it's worth pointing out that every time we restart the debug process, this URL is going to change. So that means that for whatever reason, every time we do need to restart, we're going to have to manually update this URL. Now, that would be painful and time consuming. So what we're actually going to do this time is we're going to change this to use an environment variable. And the way that we're going to do that is we're actually going to add our own script into that F5 process. So that F5 process that did a lot of the provisioning for us and set things up and running. What we want to do is we want to get the new URL, place that in an environment variable, and just use that value in our code. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a script that is going to take a value from this states file here. So every time the F5 process runs, this gets updated, and this site endpoint variable here gets updated. But this isn't our local environment variables that our web server can access. That's stored in this .env teamsfx local file in here. If we just take a look at that, we've got some variables already, bot ID and bot password, but we have the ability to add our own. So what we want to do is we want to do this automatically. We don't have to want to update things. So let's add in our script. And at the very root, I'm going to create a new folder and call that scripts. And in this folder, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it state2env.js. And inside this, we are going to write a function, or paste in a function, which essentially reads the state.local file. It finds the site endpoint property. It then finds the local environment variables file, and then it will either update what is already there, or it will actually append if it doesn't exist. So now that we've got our script, we want to put this into that F5 process. So if we open the VS Code folder, in here we have a tasks.json. And in here, this is where all of the F5 process is actually defined. Like you can see here, there's the validate and install prerequisites, start the local tunnel, and so on. So we're going to add our own task in here. So we're going to add in our own task, and we're going to call that write state to env. And in here, we're going to add in a new task, which is going to be after start services, or just before start services, sorry. So this just essentially means it's just going to run this node command, and it's going to start our script, so we can save that. And then we're going to go back to our activity handler, where we had our hard-coded URL, and we're going to change this so that now it's going to use our environment variable. So our environment variable is going to be available for us to just add into our code. Okay, so that's now done. So what we're going to do is just disconnect our debug session, and that's going to stop everything. And then I'm going to restart this using F5. So there we go, it's going to be much quicker this time than the first time that we ran this. If we take a look at our local environment variable, we should see that this gets updated with the new, there we go, with the new URL. And that's going to get added in to our code when our activity handler runs. So we have Teams running again. So we're going to be installing our app again, and the primary reason for this is, again, that dynamic URL from ngrok, because it always changes. We need to actually tell Teams again where our bot is running and how it can access it. It's going to add that in there again. Okay, so let's go back to our code and our terminal, and let's just send a request to trigger a new notification. Got our empty response, so we can go back. We've got our new message, and if I click open, we can see that we get the same message, but now this is using our dynamic URL. And this is going to make it so much easier when we get to steps where we have to restart the debug session, and that might be to install a new version of the app, because we've added some new capabilities, and we don't want to keep changing that URL every time it changes. So now that we've got our dialog implemented, we've got something showing in there, now we actually want to put some actual content in there. So let's do that now. So let's go to our open door HTML file, and we're going to add some videos. So let's add a YouTube video player. So this is just going to be static again, and let's add some styles in here that's going to make this full screen as well. So this is going to make sure that that YouTube player basically fills the whole of the iframe. Finally, let's just go back to our activity handler, and rather than having just an open door title, let's give it a more relevant title, which is going to be Wham! Last Christmas. So let's test this. As we've only changed the HTML page, we don't have to actually send another notification. We can just use the one that we already have. So if we click open here now, we've got the new title, and we have our YouTube player, and it can play. Now, as this is an advent calendar, just having one song every single day is going to be a little bit tiresome. So let's make it so that we can send different content to people on different days through this notification. So for that, we're going to need a catalogue of content, a catalogue of videos that we want to show on each given day. So let's do that now. So let's create a new file, and we're just going to call this data.json. And I'm going to copy in an object that contains an array of days. And for each day, it's got the ID, which is the same as the actual number of the day, a title, and the URL as well, which we can use to display. So what we want to do is we want to make use of this. So what we can do is we can update the trigger so that instead of just sending an empty body, that we actually send some data with our trigger, and that could be the day that we want to actually trigger, and then send through the relevant video. So let's do that now. So if we go to the index.js, we're going to update our trigger here. So first of all, we're going to extract the day from the query string parameter. So we're going to send that through as a query string parameter. It's going to be day equals and then a number. And then if we don't send a day, we're just going to send an error back, which is just going to say, the query param is now required. So that's just going to send a 400. And if it is fine, our loop's going to run. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the actual day into our render. So what we now need to do is to actually use this day value in our template. We need to update the template so that we can inject that into it. So let's do that now. So if we go to our adaptive card, and in here, what we want to actually do is we actually want to send the day to the bot framework. So when we actually click that button, we're saying, yes, we want to raise a task fetch activity, but actually here's some data as well, that when our handler receives it, it goes, oh, this is for day 2 or day 4. And the way that we can do that is we can supply another object in here, which is called data. And in this object, we're supplying the day and our injected day value, which we're passing in when we render the adaptive card. Okay, so now that we're sending that value, what we want to do is update our activity handler, because now it can access that value. The way that we can access that day value that's being passed when we click the open button on the adaptive card is we can access the data properties on the task module request object that's provided to us, and we can get the day value out that way. What we want to do is then we want to use this to filter out the object that we have in our catalog. So actually go and find the video that we want to show. So let's import that data in here. And then let's add a filter in here. So we are filtering the days in our data catalog, we're going to find the day where the ID is equal to the day that we're being passed by the bot framework, the number that's sent with the adaptive card. Now, it's worth noting that even though it's a number, when it comes back, it's coming back as a string. So we just have to convert that to an actual number, because our ID value is a number in our catalog. So now that we've found the content that we want to show, this content has the title and the URL, and what we want to do is we want to send that URL to our open door HTML page, and the way that we can do that is through using a query string parameter, which can be added in like this. So we've got the URL, query string parameter, and then we're sending the value from our catalog to our HTML page that way, and we're obviously encoding that as well because it is a URL. The next thing we want to do is we want to update our title, so that's dynamic as well. So again, we can just use the content object and use the title property to get that value back. Okay, so that's the activity handler now fixed. So we've managed to update our adaptive card, to send the day through to our handler, and then our handler is then passing a URL through the query string parameter to our HTML page. Now what we need to do is we need to update our HTML page so that instead of using this static URL, we actually use a dynamic URL. So let's do that now. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to remove the source attribute, and we're going to add that dynamically. And the way that we're going to add that dynamically is we're going to add a script tag into the page, which will take the URL of the page, and it will construct a new URL object, which we can use the search params property and the get method to actually just return that the value of the URL query string parameter. Then we can get the video iframe element by its ID and update the source as well, so that makes that dynamic. Okay, so let's test that out now. So here we have our new adaptive card. If I open this, we can see that actually our new title has been displayed, and our new video is also being displayed as well. So now this is fully dynamic. If we keep sending a notification with different days, we're going to get different content every time. Okay, now let's move on to implementing the calendar command. So to do that, let's create a new folder called commands, and in this folder let's create a new file called calendar.js. And in this, let's just create our calendar command handler class. So this is what's going to be triggered when the command is sent in the chat. We're going to add a property called trigger patterns, and this is essentially what is looking out for in the chat. So essentially, if calendar is met or is matched, it's going to run a function inside this class, and this function, this method, is called handle command received. At the moment, we're just going to return a simple text message back just to show that it is working. Because this is using a message factory class, this comes from the bot builder, the bot framework SDK. We just need to make sure that we import that. So we've created our basic handler. What we need to do is we need to tell our bot code about this handler. And we can do that by coming into this initialize file here. Now this is the bot that was created for us, the configuration, by the Teams Toolkit. When we first created our project, you can see that it has some objects in here to enable notifications. It has adapter config, such as the app ID and the app password that was already set up. We can extend this to also include commands. So we can add the command property, and we can set that to enabled, which is true. And then we can give the bot an array of commands or command handlers. What we can do is we can include our new calendar command handler in here, so that when our bot runs, it's going to have a handler there that's ready, that's looking out for that calendar keyword, and then it's gonna send that message. So let's just save that. Now, one extra thing that we want to do, if you remember right back in the demo, there was a suggestion that was made to the user to say there's a command called calendar that you can use. Well, let's add that in, and the place where we add that is in the app manifest. If we open the Teams Toolkit pane on the left-hand side here, you can see down here in the development section we've got edit manifest file. If you click on that, so this is the app manifest file, and this is a file that is packaged up and sent to Microsoft Teams every time we install the app through the dialog. And what this does is this contains the definition of our app. It basically tells Teams what capabilities it has, where the icons live, capabilities such as does it have a bot, does it have a tab, what permissions and the valid domains. So we can see here we've got a section already for bots because we have a bot. It tells it the scopes that it's available for use in. So this is personal, team and group chat. Now actually for this scenario we can actually remove these because we're only using personal. We don't want it to be used in Teams or a group chat. So let's remove that. But one thing that we can do in here is we can add a new property called command lists. So if we add this in here, this basically defines that there's a command called calendar and a bit of a description in there. And that's what's going to get shown when the user of our bot basically gets focus on that chat box. Now, because we have changed the app manifest, we need to reinstall our app to make sure that Teams is aware of that. So we're going to have to stop the debug session and restart it. So I'm going to use F5 again. So it's started all of the services. It's now opening Teams, and we'll install our app. And when we get to the chat window this time, we should have a suggestion for our calendar command. Okay, so definitely updated because we no longer have the options to add to a team or a meeting. We just add this to the personal context. And there we have our suggestion. So we can view the advent calendar, so select that, and now when I run this, we should just get a message back, a text message, calendar command received. So now let's update the calendar command to actually return an adaptive card with all of the days in the run up to Christmas. So let's create a new adaptive card. I'm going to call this calendar. Create our adaptive card using this block here. Just to quickly explain what this actually is. So this is using an image set block which contains an array of images. And what we're doing here is I'm actually using an way of iterating over an array of objects, which is our days. We've got a catalogue of content for each day, so we're just going to reuse that. So what this does is this data property, this $data property, basically says if you pass in an array, it will iterate all of this for every item that is in that array. So for example, with the ID for each image, we can make that dynamic by using the ID property from the day object. We can also pass in the URL for the actual image, some alt text as well, define its size, but also the select action as well. So this is very similar to the notification adaptive card in that it's a action submit type of action that passes an activity of type task fetch, but also data. So it's passing through the day for this image as well. So now that we've got our adaptive card ready, what we need to do is to update our command. So if we go to our calendar command, what we want to do is we want to include our data catalog in here, and we want to also include the adaptive cards tools, which we'll use to take our template and render it with our data, and also our calendar card that we just created, because that's the template that we're going to use and send through. So to replace the current implementation, which is just sending a message, we're going to replace this with a couple of lines. I'm going to explain what this is doing here. So one of the things that it's doing is it's creating an object that combines our data and also adds an extra property in here. So there's an extra property called Site Endpoint that I'm just adding to that to our data catalog, and that's going to provide us with the current URL of our local web server. And this again is like what we had with the issue earlier. We can't load content over HTTP. Therefore, we need to provide an absolute URL to be able to render our image. If I just quickly go back to the URL here, you can see that we have this signature here that basically says I want to access the site endpoint property at the root of the data that's passed in. So days, day and the site endpoint are at the same level, but inside here we're within the loop. So this allows us to break out of the loop and to access other properties. So what this then does is that it combines our adaptive card template and our card data as well. So it injects those values into the card, and then we use this message factory to send the card as an attachment back to the bot framework, which then sends that on to Microsoft Teams in the chat. Okay, so we'll save that. And now what we can do is we can test our bot. So if we write the calendar command again, a little bit of an error there. I missed out an import. So if we try this again, so we can see that all these are rendered, but we don't actually have any images yet. So let's add those images. Okay, so let's add our images for our doors. So let's create a new folder in public called image. And I already have 24 images, so these are PNGs. They're very, very small. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy them into the public folder, to the images folder we just created, and that's into our project. So if I come back, there we can see, and we've got an image for each day in the run up to Christmas. Okay, so now let's go back and let's test our calendar command again. And this time we can see that we have our images. Great. And we can basically now select different days. So if I click the 8th, we have Silent Night. But actually what I can also select is 23, which is in the future. Now, I shouldn't be able to do this. I shouldn't be able to see something that's in the future. That's naughty. So let's stop this from happening, and let's make sure that we have a message to stop people from looking indoors on future days. Let's create a new HTML file in the public folder called closed door. And in here, we are going to add in some HTML, which again, it's pretty basic. It's just a paragraph. I'm actually importing in some styles to make it look nice. So this is just the Fabric UI core styles and some CSS just to make sure that the message is in the middle of the iframe. So what we need to do is we need to update the handler for our fetch, our task module fetch. So for this, we want to get the current date, and then we want to check the day. The day that's been selected is less than or equal to the current date. So anything that is today and previous, it's going to say that that's open. And next we're going to create a URL variable, which is going to return. So if is open is true, it's going to return our open door that we've used before. But if is open is false, the URL is going to be to our closed door. And we want to do exactly the same for our title as well. So if the door is open, then we want to use the title from the content. Otherwise, we want to put in static door is closed. And for our task info, this means that we just have to supply the URL and the title variables. And if we save this and go back to our Advent calendar and choose 23. Ooh, still waiting for the code to recompile. That will just catch up. There we are, it's started. Let's try that again. That was too quick. And there we go, we've got the title of door closed and the message door is not ready to be opened yet. And actually, let's just make sure that the previous days are working fine. Yes, they are. We can still get to our content. So there we have it. We've reached the end. We've created a Advent calendar bot for Microsoft Teams using Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. I hope you've been able to follow along and that you've been able to create an Advent calendar as well. If you've got ever had any issues, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. It's been fantastic to be involved in this festive tech calendar, this community initiative, doing so much great work. And all that really remains is for us to say, Merry Christmas, everyone! Bye!